Welcome to the Misfits Career Transitions Podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Pugh. On this podcast, I'm speaking with leaders from across all different industries who have navigated the wonderful twists and turns of career transitions. Whether you're considering a change or trying to make sense of your own career journey, these stories will inspire and inform you. Together, we'll explore how embracing your unique path can lead to unexpected opportunities and fulfilling success. Get ready to redefine what it means to fit in and discover how being a misfit might just be your greatest professional asset. The sassy light is on, which means I am so excited for our guest that is joining us today on the podcast. And I'm so excited that she said yes. She is a CEO, a board member, and a transformational growth leader, having spent more than 20 years transforming Fortune 500 organizations. This global leader has worked in the US, Europe, and Asia, and has led teams spanning marketing, sales, technology, and customer service. But I met her in her most recent role as the CEO and president of NextUp, which is an organization whose mission is to advance all women in business. And speaking for myself, NextUp had this transformational impact on my own career perspectives and my own growth. So it is my honor to welcome Sarah Alter to the podcast today. Hi, it is so great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us.
It is my joy and honor to be here, Sarah Pugh. Thank you for inviting me.
It's the Sarah and Sarah show, Sarah squared today. So before we kind of get into all of the wonderful twists and turns of your career, I am always interested in, I can read your bio, everyone can read your bio, your background, but I'm always interested in how people introduce themselves into the professional world. So Sarah Alter, would you introduce yourself to the wonderful Misfit listeners we have with us today?
Absolutely. And I am a fellow misfit. That was... You got me when you shared the title of your podcast, and I'm going to call it your community, right? Mm-hmm. You got me with Misfit because I am absolutely a member of that. Now, when I introduce myself these days, I say I am free agent.
Okay.
And I am the other thing I use is I say I'm taking a gap year. Mm-hmm. Remember that famous, yep. High school, college gap year? Well, I'm taking that gap year between this career adventure and the next one. And it's been an interesting year. Yeah. I've been working for decades. Won't tell you how many, because as you and I were just chatting, you're not supposed to include any dates on your resume or LinkedIn now. No, but I'd been working for decades in the corporate world. And I call my time there as I was very much a servant leader, but I was also an entrepreneur. So in my corporate time, I was that leader when somebody needed a team to be scrapped and rebuilt, or somebody needed a channel to be launched, or a product or service to be created and delivered. I was that leader, that go-to gal. And I loved, the experience that I had in the corporate world. But when my career adventure took me to NextUp, which was a nonprofit startup for all practical purposes, that's when I realized, hey, I never thought I was an entrepreneur, but I am an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Because I really was energized by the mission, being the servant leader that I am. But two, incredibly energized, by the growth. And it was not only my own personal growth opportunity, but then the organizational growth opportunity in terms of who we served. And so albeit I am free agent, but, now I am exploring that next career adventure. And I am seeking C-suite leader roles for a growth-focused organization.
Okay. So when you think about that, right? So you've got that base and that foundation of servant leadership that you kind of know that's who you are, and that's the value that you bring, especially as you start looking at these growth and transformational, whether it's entrepreneurial, all those aspects. Is there, when you look at that opportunity, is there a particular view that you take in terms of your overarching career journey, your philosophy on career journeys? Is there like, I need to add this tool to my toolkit, or is it just kind of expanding on what it is that you do so well, especially, after 20 some odd years working in this great industry that we all live and love? How do you view that overarching career journey?
Yeah. No, so I would say there's probably two things. One, I have to be inspired by the customer or the client, right? Whoever it is we're serving. I have to be inspired by the product or the service that we provide. I have to be proud of it. I need to be able to wear the brand on my sleeve.
Yeah.
Be proud of it. And then I have to be inspired by the culture.
Yeah.
And I know we're going to get into that in a little bit,
Yeah.
but like that culture, we'll say it, culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Yeah.
That culture has to be a place where I can thrive and leverage, the strengths and the skills and the experience that I've gathered. The second piece though is, I've always needed and wanted, particularly in my earlier career years, I needed and wanted a nice long and wide runway. So I needed to be able to go to an organization where their culture believed in giving you different opportunities, in challenging you, putting you in an area where you may know absolutely nothing, but they invest in you, they coach you through it, they believe in you. Staples was the perfect example. I was there for 10 years and I had, I've lost count in how many jobs, but I feel like I had like 5 or 6 different jobs in that 10-year period.
Yeah.
And in several of them, I'd never done it before. But the leader who I was partnering with and reporting into, gave me that opportunity. And it to me now as a C-suite leader, I want to make sure that I create that type of culture and those types of opportunities for anybody who's part of our team, and that, we're going to invest in developing their skills, and challenging them. One of my favorite expressions is, if your dreams don't scare you, they're just not big enough.
I love that.
And so, and as much as I had the good fortune of being able to chase these dreams and further myself in my career, I want to make sure that I make that same thing happen in any organization that I'm a part of.
Yeah, I think, you and I share a leader that hopefully I'll get her on this podcast one day, that, she put me and gave me that opportunity when I was at Visa, that, I happened to sit next to her at a luncheon, an internal luncheon. And she came and said, have you thought about sales? Can I take a crack at you at sales? Like, I think you'd be really good at it. And she was the one who put me into that sales function, which then led me to being the ambassador for NextUp for the company. And that was, opened up all these doors. It's not something that I probably would have sought out for myself, but she saw something in me that thought, I think she could do this. And it's those, having spent 10 years at the wonderful world of Visa, I moved around a lot. And I think that was actually one of the things that led me to starting this was, I went from communications to marketing to sales to these things. And I was having a hard time figuring out what it all meant. So when you're giving that opportunity to others of allowing them to experience career growth, sometimes that individual may not even have thought about that career change or that journey. Yeah. So when you had some of those opportunities, whether it was at Staples or otherwise, like, how did you know to say yes to something that may not have been really on your radar, but you kind of did it? And how do you make sense of maybe where you were to where that role is? Do you know what I mean? Like, how does that thread pull through now that you look at it in hindsight?
Yeah. Well, in this case, the first opportunity was I'd moved to the UK. My, husband's job had brought him over. And I went over, interestingly enough, with the thought of, I'll take some time off and travel and enjoy being in a whole different country and culture. And, that lasted about 8 weeks and I was climbing the walls. And so I started interviewing, and I had, through a connection at Staples, got an opportunity to go be a contractor for them.
Mm-hmm.
And while I was there, I was working with the finance team. They ended up like firing the marketing comptroller, the head of marketing for Staples Europe. And they offered me the job. And I,
Okay.
you know what? I naively and energetically just took it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I knew I was going to be okay, because the gentleman who was the managing director over Europe said, "Don't worry about it. I got you. What you
Yeah.
don't know, I'll teach you." And there's all sorts of great resource from, corporate headquarters that, fly over to Europe on a regular basis. I'll connect you with them. And this is all good. And again, it really speaks to it was such an incredible philosophy, and that's what drove the success that Staples had for so many years. And I know they've taken an entirely different path now, but at the time that I was there, it was at the height of their success.
Mm-hmm.
And so I saw so many other people having that same opportunity in different ways and in different areas of the business, that I knew, they were going to challenge you, but they were going to put the training wheels on it first, and then they were going to eventually take them off and let you run, let you race that bike on. So in that case, I knew there was evidence that it wasn't, you weren't going to be challenged by the Peter principle, right?
Yeah.
Where, you got stretched too far and then you failed. And they had a leadership team and a cultural or organizational philosophy that just gave people every opportunity they could desire.
Yeah. I was just thinking about that too. You mentioned about how you think about, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And when you look at those different opportunities, how important that cultural environment is, and to recognize when there are those leaders that are willing to, and that are willing to say, don't worry about it. I got you. I got your back. Like, you could fail a little bit. I'm not going to let you fail too far, but I'm going to help you as you figure this out. So when you think about that, trying to look at a company before you say yes, and looking at that cultural environment, how important is it for networking, and when you start making those transitions? Like, how do you effectively build and maintain that network so that you know how to look for it? You bring the Staples culture over to the UK, and then you figure out, okay, well, I understand how this culture is. How do you start to look at how to build that network of people, and how important is that for you?
Yeah, and I think to kind of I felt like you just asked me two questions.
I probably did.
Oh.
No, 800 that I could ask you all at once.
Yeah, no, and you hit it on the head, and not to beat the dead horse, but the culture is a huge aspect for me. It's got to have the right energy, so that you can thrive. But the other bigger learning as I've explored other opportunities in my career journey, and this one I learned painfully, but I chased a title.
Yeah.
And I chased a comp package.
Yep.
And any of the spidey sense or that sixth sense that I'd had at that point about this potentially maybe not being the right culture, I ignored it, pushed it in the background. And, it ended up being a much shorter adventure than I typically have. I'm the type of person that I plant roots, and I want to go in and work my way around the organization. And, and in this case, I was in this role for less than 2 years because it just wasn't the right fit. I was not going to be successful. I was not going to thrive. And so, as I'm evaluating, right, what's next, it's interesting. I was a CEO for 6 years, but it was a smaller organization, 10 to 12 million. And as I'm looking at other opportunities now, I'm not getting caught up on the fact that, I was a CEO and president, and I am having conversations where I say, oh, well, no, I'd come in and be a chief revenue officer or a chief commercial officer, because I'm open to, in a larger organization, I may have even more scale and scope at what one might think was a more junior position. And so, titles, org charts, don't ever really faze me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like when you're part of a team, you need to be partnering across the organization, and it doesn't matter who reports into who, right? The other thing that I also, as I'm evaluating an organization or a network, right? It's like, I want to know what that path could be, like 2 to 3, jobs out.
Yeah.
Right. I'm accepting a role, and you got to prove yourself before you're even considered for the next promotion or the next opportunity. But I always ask to meet, and I'm sure everybody does, and if they don't, they should. But I always ask to meet many other leaders in other functions or teams or departments, because that will be that internal, professional network. And then that can also suggest to you, hey, I may enter in the sales organization, but there could be opportunity in marketing, or there could be opportunity in customer service, or, you name it. And so for me, I'm always all about meeting as many people as I can. And that, I think, again, was probably when I chased that title and comp package, I didn't meet enough people either.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I had met, right?
Yeah. It's because look, we all, there are some times where you walk in and you see the job description and you're applying for that particular job as we're growing up in our careers. And it's like, I want to be the head of marketing and communications for X, Y, and Z company. And then you get in there and you're like, this is absolutely not what you need. And what we're going to be doing is this whole other, maybe a growth, like let's actually build to building a whole marketing and communications function. I'm curious because, I've faced that same thing. I've gotten into a job, and it's why I've called it Misfits. You get into a job and you're like, I am not the right fit for this role. But I'm going to do it because I learn and I grow and I figure all these things out when I'm in there. And as I've been, and I'm going through my own transition, as I look at these other opportunities, I'd love to hear your perspective on how I hear that great idea about wanting to talk to other leaders in other parts of the organization, but what other tips are there to really help suss out what that cultural environment is, but also what the development opportunity is, so that you can think about those roles that are 2-3 years down the line and building towards that? What are some tips that you've used to help really ask the right questions for that cultural environment?
Yeah. Well, that's the beauty of LinkedIn, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like now you can find someone who knows someone who knows someone who, and so on. Right. And I've absolutely learned beyond who they may present in your interview journey to go a level or two beyond that.
Yeah.
Because you want to get that true story, from individuals, who are either currently working there or may have worked there.
Right.
That to me, I think is that, again, another one of my, it would have been a great opportunity had I done that. Although honestly, you know what, I think I still would have taken that role. And so it's still a lesson to this day.
Yeah.
But that I think you're remiss if you don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, there are other sites out there too, right? Where you can read about, the company culture and the employee ratings and feedback. But I think you have to consume that with a grain of salt, because it's, one, you're either going to get the people that are absolutely thrilled or the people that have been let go and are, absolutely upset with the organization. You're not necessarily going to get that, average or status quo, type of sentiment or perception in the company. So I would think that that's one thing you can look at, but I don't know that it's always reflective of, the true experience, but definitely reaching out to other people and asking their advice and guidance. And I've definitely done that. I, had an opportunity that I was exploring, and it ended up being too junior, but I knew somebody who knew the person that I would have worked for, and I was able to reach out to her and get her true perspective on it. And it was incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think there's, I'm back pulling my former public relations hat on, and there was always, we used to always talk to leaders about no matter what questions are asked of you, the things that you want to put forward. You always have, if I ask you this, I know I want to make sure that this message gets across. It's bringing that same type of vibe of when you're interviewing for a company, they're going to have their questions for you, and you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions that you want to get across about you. So if they're not introducing you to Sally, Pete, and Brian, but Sally, Pete, and Brian are going to have a really interesting perspective, there's nothing stopping you from asking those, using your network to ask those questions if they're not going to present those opportunities to you. It comes down to that, looking at it, this is a job for you, not just, you're not going to work for them. You're going to work for what value can I give to that company. So I want to suss out if it's the right opportunity for me. Then am I the right fit for them? But it's got to be like, you have to put that perspective into your own hands and go out and find that information versus what they're going to position to you on an hour interview and a case study that you have to present about something. You don't really learn a lot of that about them.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's like, you'll inevitably meet with someone in HR, right?
Yeah.
And they're closest to, here are the development programs or opportunities, and so on. However, that's where you can say, hey, who would I partner with the most in this role? And I'd love to meet them. And then in that conversation, not only are you sussing out the chemistry, right? But that's where you can say, hey, so what development opportunities have you had? How have they invested in your training? And then you can, speak straight to the person that would engage in these programs that are supposedly available.
Yeah.
And, and hopefully you're hearing the same story twice, not a disconnect, but it could be a way to suss that out. That, you're being told it's available, but not everybody actually gets access to it.
So let's go back to that job and I've made the same decision. I went for the title, I went for the salary, and it was lovely for those two things. Like, it was great for that. But at the end of the day, it was like, maybe this was not the right fit for me for a variety of reasons, but I did it. And, you were in that job for 2 years or however long it was. What was that trigger that said, you know what, I think it's time for me to move on? What are some signs or indicators that it might be kind of time for that transition? And then the follow-up to that is, how do you approach that decision thoughtfully so that you can maybe find a better fit for the next time around?
No. And it and I have two situations that I could probably use to answer this question. I'm gonna use a different one. So, and in this one, I left voluntarily, right? The other one where I chased the title, I had, both feet out the door, as they say. And I ended up getting restructured out, right? I got fired, right? And they cut my 120 person team. They eliminated my role and then our $80 million budget. And there was just so happened to be an $80 million revenue gap at that time. Interesting how those two numbers match. Anywho, this other role, I was at an organization where I had been there for quite a period of time. And my immediate boss at that point in time, he moved on to another role, and he had, positioned me to, take his place, and, was thrilled for his support. They ended up choosing another gentleman who, honestly, at the end of the day, he had significantly more experience than I did. So I can see why they chose him. Disappointing, but I can see, from a business perspective, it was the right thing for the business. But he and I did not have good chemistry. And it took about 3 months to realize that he wanted to, build his own team with his own leaders. and he didn't want anybody around that was part of the old regime prior to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very apparent to me that I was not going to be successful being a part of his team and having him as my leader. He was not going to advocate, for me the same as my old boss had done all along. And so that's when I realized that it was time for me to move on.
Yeah.
And so I ended up, and interestingly enough, at that same time, both my parents were diagnosed with terminal diseases.
Mm-hmm.
All three of my kids were having some kind of a challenge, like academically or medically. And for me, I was fortunate enough that I said, you know what, I'm just going to take some time off. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to take some time off to regroup personally. And I'm just going to put that professional, journey on the back shelf for now. And so for me, again, and not everybody always has that opportunity. I was fortunate that financially I could afford to take that time off. But if in most other cases, it's, you want to start that search process, right?
Yeah.
So that it's easier to recruit when you're employed.
That it is.
Yeah. And so, but in that case, it was just the right thing for me to do for my family and for me. But the funny thing about it is I probably lasted about 6 months, and my kids called me into the kitchen, sat me down at the counter, and they said, "Mom, you're fired. You stink as a stay-at-home mom. You screw up the carpools. You can't cook. You forget to run all the errands that we need you to do. So you're fired." So yeah, that was the first time I got fired in my career. And I ended up shortly thereafter, I was able to put my hat, back in the ring, and, ended up finding, what ended up being this next role where I mistakenly chased the title and the comp package.
Yeah.
It only stayed for a couple of years, but, it's important, from my perspective that, when you always have to take care of your family, and financial responsibilities are a big one. And I so appreciate that. And so not everybody has that good fortune to say, I'm quitting and I'm going to, go find my next job. But you should never be afraid that if this is not the right chemistry, or this is not the right team, or this is not the right overarching culture, to start exploring other opportunities. And where you start is with your network.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe within the company, if it's a massive corporation and you've made friends or good contacts in other departments, there very well could be an opportunity there.
Right.
Right. It could be, vendors or partners outside, vendors and partners that you work with. You can make, contacts there through your friends, and it's important that all the while to keep that network energized and thriving and growing, because you don't miss it until you absolutely need it.
Yeah.
And I've learned over the last several moves to really nurture that network and to keep it energized and thriving. And again, not only externally from a professional perspective, but from a social perspective, and then internally from a professional and a social perspective. So you need to invest in doing coffees and lunches with other leaders and other teams or departments. And even in some cases, you may be partnering with them and their teams. And so there's, great opportunity there to improve that relationship. But in some cases you may not be, but it's a great way to learn about other facets of the business and how you might be able to, navigate in your own career.
Yeah. I think there's a fair amount of that. I love that building that relationship with those that you work with internally beyond just your social network, which I have refound my friends that I kind of put my head down in that role for 2 years. And I forgot that I had all these great friends. And I'm finding them again, and I'm learning more about myself. But I think there's a fair amount of that, doing that internal networking, that you also learn how they view you and what you're known for. Like for Sarah Alter to be calling somebody in, the sales group or the product group, and they take those calls, they take that because they know you for X, Y, and Z. And that then helps just to build your own persona, your own profile, that somebody might think of you when there is that opportunity around the corners. Like, you know what, I remember Sarah Alter had these great things about her, and she came and sought these and was proactive about it. And just kind of keeping those relationships alive helps to then open up opportunities that you may not have even thought about the first time around. So I love that idea about not only having that relationship with your network and the community that you build, but you're with your friends as well as your boss and your peers and others within your organization before you lose that boss and your peers in that organization, and you're kind of out here on your own. Well, listen, this has been, we could probably do this for years on end. I think you and I have done this for probably years on end, having these conversations. I want to round us out here a little bit with a little bit of quick fire round to kind of, again, get to know you a little bit personally, in addition to this. But when you are not in your all hands hat right now, looking at opportunities and having your conversations and your community networking, what are you listening to? What podcasts are you listening to, or books that you are reading, either personal or professional?
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. I, from a professional perspective, I had just read a book by David Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tight, and I had to write this down. It's called How to Know a Person. And I just saw him speak. He spoke here in Chicago. I'm a member of the Economic Club here in Chicago. And he spoke, and he's a former, journalist, political commentator, and now he's been writing more books. And it focuses in and around how you can just be, a better person. And quite frankly, at the end of the day, just be a better listener.
Yeah.
The way you get to know somebody is by asking questions, but then most importantly, listening.
Yeah.
And it's funny, I'm interviewing now, as I'm looking at board roles and at other C-suite roles. And I have to catch myself because the natural inclination is just to tell my story.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you need to ask questions. Well, what is it that you're looking to fill? What are the roles that are open, or what are the, portfolio companies that you might need leadership or change in? And so it's all about, asking the right questions and then listening. And it reinforces a lot of what we've probably been taught, like growing up and now as adults, but you realize I don't do that well. I don't, I don't listen, so I would advocate that. And then a friend just passed it on, and I just started it, but it's Horse by Geraldine Brooks. And I have heard multiple people say it is the best book I've ever read.
Fictional
and it's
book?
about horses too. So stay tuned. I'll let you know.
All right, I'm going to add that to the list. I'm just finishing one of my Audible books right now, so I'm in search for a new one. Anything related to animals, I can be hooked on that in a second.
Count me in too, right? Yeah.
All right, Horse, it's on my list. With all of the different jobs that you have had in your past, what is a job that if you could do one job for any day, regardless of skill or qualifications, what would it be and why?
Oh, it would be, I would love to be a veterinarian. Same. I know. I, with my free time, I'm trying to use it productively. And so I have been volunteering at an animal shelter, dogs and cats. And I go there probably twice a week, and I walk dogs and I, entertain dogs. I haven't moved over to the cat wing yet. I think I'll eventually do that. But yeah, I would be a veterinarian, and that's what I wanted to be all growing up. And then I don't know what the heck happened. I guess I discovered math and I loved it. And then that next plan was to be an accountant. And the rest is history. But yes, that's what I would do.
I did the same thing. I wanted to study veterinary, and I went to go volunteer at a vet hospital. And I was, in the room when they put a dog under to go to sleep to do surgery on it. I was done. I was like, nope, can't do it. Can't do it. Seeing that dog on the table just broke my heart. I'm like, I want to be there in playtime. I want to be playing with them. And so I ended up working at a dog kennel in charge of playtime for the dogs instead.
Yeah. No, I know. And it's so important. The first couple of times I went to volunteer, I would sob in the car on the way home because I couldn't bring 6 dogs home. And I've been warned by my husband, 2 is enough. My daughter has 2. So we have, at any given time, we have 4.
Yes.
But I went back and I was chatting with one of the other volunteers who's been doing it for years. And I said, how do you not cry and get sad? Yeah. And she looked at me and she said, listen, little lady, she said, put your big girl panties on. This isn't about you and what you're thinking or feeling. It's about these animals. And when you come and you spend time with them and show them love and show them affection and care, you improve their situation, which sets them up for greater success to be happy when that next family who's going to foster or adopt them shows up. So get over it.
It's kind of the whole thing to your story. You go and you build growth and transformation. You're growing and transforming these animals to be successful in their next life.
I loved it. No, I love that advice. And I thank her every time I see her. Thank you for putting me in my place.
Yeah. I love that. I did not know this about you, and I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. My last question for you. What is your favorite way to unwind after a busy workday?
Well, I would have said volunteering at the shelter, but I'll give you another example. I have discovered road biking.
Oh.
And a couple years ago, my husband always just used to, leave. He'd be gone for hours on end. And I'm like, I really like working out. I like riding bikes, walking, swimming. And so for my birthday, he bought me a road bike. And so I love jumping on. We've got some great trails out here in the suburbs of Chicago. And, you can go, 15, 20, 25 miles out. So road biking.
Wow. I have not yet ventured into that. I have too many histories of me falling off bikes. So probably it's not going to be in my history. Yeah. I'll have to try something to that effect. Well, Sarah, as always, thank you so much for always sharing of your time, being so willing and giving to teach and to mentor. You've always been a great mentor for me over the course of these past couple of years. And I've so enjoyed listening to your insights about how you are navigating these fun challenges of career transition. So thank you for sharing your insights and your experience with us. And I hope that all of our listeners are taking away, and I know they are taking away some valuable learnings and lessons to inspire them as they navigate their own career journeys. So thank you. And I appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. This was such a joy.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Sassy lights are going off. Bye-bye. Wow, what a great first episode to kick off Misfits. I absolutely loved where this conversation went. This episode was all about finding your fit and sussing out a culture that is going to help you thrive and that speaks to your skills and your strengths. That's sometimes a lot easier said than done, and I really appreciated her guidance. A couple of quick highlights from me. I really resonated with Sarah's comments about how she is evaluating roles and that she has to be inspired by the company and by the customer and proud of the product or service that company provides. And as I look back at my own career, I recognize that that's actually been a core tenet of the roles where I felt strongest. I've always been proud to work for companies in my history. I liked saying that I worked at Wells Fargo and Visa and Uber. There was a cachet to these companies, but it was also important to me that I could directly tie the work that I was doing at these companies to the benefit of the customer. For many of those roles, it was about helping small businesses thrive, which is a huge passion point for me, helping others find greater success. And so that's certainly a great way of thinking about your next role and that transition. What inspires you? Who inspires you? And when you look at that next company, can you get behind their product or service, and does it motivate you? Secondly, I love the section on chasing a title, because who hasn't been there when you've chosen that title or that pay over the company culture, even though you know that it might not be the right environment for you? Trust yourself and know what's best for you. Brene Brown posted something recently on LinkedIn where she said there was a correlation between the jobs that she picks and what she wants more of in life. And to me, that's about taking stock of where you are, what's missing in your life or your current role or the company, and then seek out what it is that you need to fill that void. And as you're looking for that next opportunity, go for the opportunity, not the job title. Titles are very different across companies and industries. Evaluate the role based on what it's going to add to your life and to your portfolio of careers. And thirdly, we've spent a lot of time talking about culture and utilizing your network, because in a period of transition, it is so important. I loved her insights about meeting other leaders and other functions and building out both your internal and external network, and then constantly nurturing that environment. Ask questions, because when you have determined that it's time to move on, you'll want to utilize that network to its greatest extent. Her book recommendations are spot on. The Geraldine Brooks book on horse. I just am about 100 pages from finishing it, and I'm obsessed with it. As Amazon puts it, it's a story of spirit, obsession, and injustices across American history. It's beautiful, it's ugly, and all at the same time. And then David Brooks's book on how to know a person, I quickly added it to my Amazon cart. It will be here before we know it, and I can't wait to dig into this book. It's something that I have often focused on in my own development, and I'm really interested in diving into the art of active listening and asking the right questions. Okay, that's it for the first episode. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks with insights from another great Misfit. Bye-bye.